be doing a talk on alchemy. Most of the talk is going to be on Carl Jung's work, but I'll be bringing in other books. With that being said, let's have a little quote from one of Carl Jung's books. This one's called Psychology and Alchemy by Carl Jung, page 258, paragraph 364. You should collect the books of different authors, because otherwise it is impossible to understand them. And he should not throw aside a book which he has read once, twice, or even 3 times, although he has not understood it, but should read it again 10, 20, 50 times, or even more. At last he will see within the authors are where the authors are mainly agreed. There the truth lies hidden. Now, with that being said, everybody watching this video is going to interpret that in at least a slightly different way, maybe in a radical different way, because that's the nature of our language. General Semantics, Seminar, 1937. A guy named Alfred Korzybski. I probably messed up that name, but nonetheless, he has some interesting things to say. The first premise he has is that the map is not the territory. Our language is a map of our experiences, of what we experience, of us trying to communicate that and record it. And those words are not our actual experiences, are not the actual objects. But there can be a tendency to treat it that way. The map is not all the territory. So even when we do use words and do comprehend what they're representing, they don't cover everything. The map is self-reflective. That means that with the English language or any language we use, we can talk about the language and examine the language with that same language. And that's very interesting. He has some other interesting things to say here. I always like this one. Do you know what happened in the war? Soldiers who expected horrors got them, but had no nervous breakdowns. But those soldiers that did not expect them did break down quite often, predictably. Otherwise, expectations. If you expect horrors and you get them, you won't harm yourself nervously. But if you do not expect them, they may harm you nervously. The shock does the harm. Take those facts as facts. His works has all kinds of neat little quotes about things that basically are showing you that when we take our words as the actual thing, even if they're false, they affect our nervous system. And this has a lot to do with alchemy. In my studies of alchemy, there's basically 4 processes. The first one is the chaos, the diago. The chaos is a situation where the opposites are at war with each other. And this process is very important because it's the first process. The second process is pulling those forces apart and separating them. Then we go into a cleansing and a definition of what we have here and what's going on. Without discernment, we have no consciousness. So we become conscious of our unconscious workings, and we are able to use that consciousness to purify out what's not necessary to be there and to realign things. And finally, the chemical wedding. We bring the opposites back together in harmony so that they can work together to create greater consciousness and greater works within the outside. So in alchemy, I see it as 3 different ways of working alchemy. And again, when I speak this, I'm speaking in a elementic way. I'm saying one thing at a time. And that's not how life works. Let me explain this for a little bit more. To me, there's the physical alchemy, where people create spagyrics. And they go through those processes of taking elements, splitting them apart, purifying them, putting them back together, and creating some nice spagyrics, or tinctures, if you like to call them that, in order to help our health and other things. Then there's the mental one, where we use the alchemy to understand ourselves. We go within ourselves. We separate ourselves from the chaos of the world, and we recognize that everything we see out there is a reflection of our own awareness. We interpret things according to how we are. And we can look at that, become aware of our unconscious processes, find out where the opposites are within ourselves, purify those, and reharmonize ourselves. When we go back out into the world, now we don't project our own chaos. And when there is chaos, such as in the political scenes or religious scenes or whatever scenes we go into, we can see clearly, much more clearly, what's going on without projecting our craziness upon that. Then there's the spiritual aspect of it. Now, those can't be split apart. They all work together. No matter what realm you're working on with those, they all work together. Some may be more pronounced than others. So today, or over the next few days, I'm going to do this in sections so it makes it a little bit more coherent so I can prepare for each section. I'll be going over Carl Jung's work, about, at least 4 or 5 of his books. And I'll be skipping around because it's very easy to take Carl Jung's work and pick a subject because he has such a large volume of different subjects he talks on. And I'm going to go into some of these different subjects he goes in and show how they apply to the inner alchemy. What I'm going to be getting into is more the inner alchemy, the alchemy of the mind and the spiritual, and how when we have a vocabulary coming from the alchemist, we have a way of being able to see things in a more of a whole way. You take a subject like alchemy or biology or electronics, and you take away the vocabulary, then that science goes away. So vocabulary, language is very important in order to preserve the great memory of our experiences. And this is where alchemy really comes in. Because instead of having all these different things split apart, different types of medical professionals, different types of electronic professionals, different types of professional whatevers, alchemy brings it all together as a whole. It still has to split things apart during part of that process to examine them, but then it harmonizes it and brings it back together. And that is the beauty of the language of alchemy. Now, in general semantics, he wrote a book called Science and Sanity. And I think all you people out there, hopefully, maybe not all, could agree that if there's anything this world needs, it needs sanity in its science. Now I'm going to read a little something out of Science and Sanity. So you get a little flavor, we'll give you a little flavor of what these books are all about by doing some quotes. He says here, my earnest suggestion, backed by experience to the reader, is to read the book through several times, but not to dwell on points which are not clear to him. At each reading, the issues will become clearer until they become entirely his own. Superficially reading of the book is positively discouraged, as it will prove to be so much time wasted. Experience teaches us that the number of somatic maladjustments, particularly among the white-collar class, is very large. At present, I do not know any case where the thorough training in such a non-Aristotelian somatic discipline would not give very serious means for better adjustment. It is quite down affirmative. Somatic disturbances sharpen operations, judgments of powers of observation, and so forth. It will eliminate different psychological blockages, help to overcome the very annoying and common inferiority feelings. It will assist the outgrowing of the adult infantile state, which is a nervous deficiency practically always connected with some pathological sex reactions or lack of normal healthy impulses. After all, we should not be surprised at this. Language, as such, represents the highest and latest physiological and neurological function of an organism. It is unique with Smith and uniquely human circular structure. To use a logical term, or of spiral structure, to use a four-dimensional or physical-chemical aspect term. Before we can use the semantic nervous apparatus properly, we must first know how to use it and to formally use this, and to formulate this use. All right, so that's a little flavor of what this book's all about. He also has a term here called multi-ordinal, words that are multi-ordinal. What he means by that is there are certain words that have different meanings depending on the context they're in. And these can create a lot of confusion because other people will interpret them different way depending on how they interpreted those contexts. Words such as yes, no, true, false, fact, reality, cause, effect, agreement, disagreement, proposition, number, relationship, order, structure, abstraction, characteristic, love, hate, doubt, and many more. So this is the first thing I wanted to get out there, is that I'm going to be showing that in Jung's work, with the alchemical language, we can first look at the terms that they use and recognize that different alchemists have different meanings for a lot of these main terms. And of course, they were in different context. They had different lives. They had different things going on. So that is one of the things that makes it a little difficult to go into the old readings of the alchemist and really get a clear pattern of what they were saying. And in life today, that happens too, to a certain extent. Now, a little bit about myself. I've worked as a lead breakfast cook back in the 80s while going to school at Mesa College, getting a digital electronics degree. And then I worked at National University to get a degree in software engineering. And when I worked at National University, I didn't get paid. I only worked 20 hours a week so that my schooling was free. And at first I worked in the academic department, and I had access and helped to organize the records of the teachers where the students were evaluating the teacher's performance. Because at National, when you went to a class, you got to evaluate the teacher and turn it in. Then I went to their lab, their computer science lab, and became a tutor for software engineering and other subjects while going there. After that, I worked at a place called ViewTech, where we did video and text type work, which was new at the time. Only worked there for about 6 months. They went out of business, and then I got a job at the place called Sunstrand, where they did small engines that go into the back of the airplane for cabin pressure and electricity. I worked on the 3200. I worked on projects such as the V-22, Offspring, and also the Black Hawk. Then I got a job at Solar Turbines, where I worked with larger turbine engines that did oil and gas for pumping oil. Those engines also are in the factories of processing plants for creating gas and other things. The compressors help to regulate the processes and other stuff. And power generation for remote places, either on boats, jungles, oil platforms. I worked in the controls department. I was a software engineer. I did display systems, man-machine interfaces, we called them. I did communications, and I did automations of software. So when I first went there, I was saying, man, all this stuff could be automated. And the engineers were making mistakes. So I went and took my own initiative and wrote software that would automatically generate the display screens and check everything that happened to make sure it was done with proper addresses to things, because engineers had to go out in the field after they did their jobs and correct all their mistakes. And it took 2-3 weeks to make the display systems and another few weeks to travel, and it cost a lot of money. I boiled that down to 5 minutes by automating all that software. Their display screens were automatically created just by typing in their job number, and all the checks and balances were checked. So from that point on, management allowed me to have 20 hours a week to do anything I wanted, and 20 hours a week to work on the projects that they had sorted according to which ones saved the most money for the company. I was given a lot of freedom. I worked with the field engineers, with communications, using ladder logic. I worked with the shop floor people. I worked with the design engineers. And I ended up working with other departments because I created engines and software that could strategically search and create databases of information. And, I was basically getting the treasure out of that drive they had with all their information to give information to people. Because once you have information on things, now you can easily do things much quicker. I automated more software as time went on and did that kind of stuff. I was one of the guys that could go with people who didn't get along, get in between, talk to both, find out their language, be in a meeting, see that they're in conflict, and say, wait a minute, we need to create a data dictionary because I know you guys are talking the same language or thinking the same language, but your words mean different things to you because you're in different departments. As soon as we did that, things cleared up. So this is my experience of what I had. I've also worked as things on the outside, such as dog park president of a larger dog park club of about 100 members, and did the same thing. There was a lot of conflicts, and I was able to get in there and mediate things. I also had to mediate things with the city and other things while doing that. Okay, enough of that. Now, while that happened, I ended up getting heavy metal poisoning, and that took me down. And it's taken me years to be able to deal with this because I had my nervous system damaged, and to be able to turn that around, purify my system, bring things back together, and be able to reharmonize. Now, I go to a couple online things, Ayurvedic, Alphabetic, and True Living. And from their teachings, I was able to get the final keys I needed to understand how to purify my system and remineralize it to bring it together. And I'm just coming out of that chaos of the spine and bringing it back together so that I can once again come out and be able to articulate what I've been through. There's been a lot of things that's gone down, and I'm sure every one of you people out there have had experiences of trauma like that and other things too, because, wow, that's the world we seem to be living in now. You just watch the political scene on TV, and there it is. Now, with Jung, we have different things I want to get into. One of the first ones I'm going to get into is psychological types. There's basically 4 different psychological types, but they split off in about 16. We'll get into that first. Then I want to get into the archetypes and the collective unconscious. While I worked as a software engineer, we had design patterns, common things that we used to design things over and over again. That's what this book talked about, and I studied. I used a lot of the C language and the C++ language, and they have the same thing, a standard template library of common structures, common operations, and common ways to integrate through those structures and do operations on them, and then ways to customize that so you can write software very quickly. So there's a parallel between software and using the right language that models the reality of the environment and the people I'm working with. Makes a big difference to be able to write software fast, make it clear so it's easy to maintain, and to be able to hand it off to somebody else that understands those processes and archetypes of software to maintain it. That's where Carl Jung really pulled me in. And that's where the archetypes and the unconscious, you can read about it. Where? You've probably read about the unconscious already. The Greek tragedies, fairy tales, dreams. They create those characters of the movies with this stuff. A lot of your directors and writers read Carl Jung's work in order to have a clear understanding of how those work. So you've been seeing them a long time. You see them in your own life, in your own way. There's where things happen. The key for mental alchemy, inner mental alchemy, is to find the things that I'm doing unconsciously and become conscious of them so that I can get a hold of them, split them apart, cleanse them, find balance in them, get understanding of them, and then be able to reintegrate them so my life works more harmoniously. And the people I'm around, when I communicate, I can find out how their psychological type is a little bit, where they're at, and know how to communicate with them in a way that my inner experiences can be conveyed to the words I speak more clearly, and understanding that no matter what I say, no matter what I do, there's only so far that can happen because they have their own experiences of life and I have mine, and nobody's more important than anybody else. We're all just down here having our own experience and doing our own growth. And that's all just my opinion. Everybody out there may have different opinions about this. What I'm talking about is me. What I'm talking about is my experiences. What I'm talking about is what helped me to clarify my mind in a way that I could be able to think clearly more inside and be able to integrate myself better in a world of chaos. And with that, I'm going to take a little break and get back. All right, a little bit of old school here. Anyway, I want to bring attention to 3 communities that have helped me quite a bit in getting a handle on all this. Dr. Andrew Kaufman with his True Living Fellowship, Dr. Barlando with Alphabetic Community. I belong to those 2. Dr. Tom Cowan with New Biology. I don't belong to his community yet, but I have listened to his talks and other things. And I just want to give credit where credit is due. Anyway, today I want to get into the psychological, what is it again? It's the psychological types. So, with that being said, what are these psychological types? Not personality types, psychological types. Here we go. Let's zoom out a little bit here. And here they are. Let's take a look here. First, we have sensation. Sensation tells me that something is. Thinking tells you what a thing is. And feeling informs you through its feeling tone of the value of things. And intuition is that mystical hunches, seeing around the corner, just knowing something without realizing how you know it. And they're in a quadrant here, a 4 quadrant, with the ego floating around this. Now, this is really the key when we want to get into getting out of the chaos, in my view, anyway. So let me explain how this kind of works. Thinking, if you're a thinking psychological type, then this is kind of your unconscious area. If you're a feeling type, then this is kind of your unconscious type. If you're a sensation type, same thing. Your intuition is more unconscious too. If you're an intuition, the sensation is more of the unconscious. Now, you can't be at both places at once. You kind of can float between back and forth on this. With that being said, if you're a thinking type and you lead towards intuition, then you're kind of the thinking type with intuition, and vice versa, thinking type with sensation. Yet this is where your unconscious is most. Same with sensation. If you're a sensation type and you lead towards thinking, then you're a sensation thinking type. We go through that, we have 8 different types. Now we have extrovert and introvert that lays on top of that, which doubles that to 16 different psychological types. That's what's going on. Now, when the thinking type is trying to explain things to the feeling type through his thinking ways, this guy or lady is not going to get it. And that's just how it is. And vice versa. When they're giving their feelings to a thinking type, the thinking type's not going to get it. And if they try to force things, they're going to split apart further. Same with their sensation and intuition. So you can see while in chaos what's going on here. This thinking type thinks, man, I can explain things with what they're doing wrong and let them know what's happening and all this stuff. They're going to get it. And that doesn't happen. They end up splitting apart even more. The feeling type is like, hey, this is what I feel. This is what I'm going through. I don't care about your logic. You got to just understand this. That just gets him going that way. The sensation and intuition, same thing happens. Okay, so we have the opposites in conflict and chaos. What can we do about this? Anyway, that's where we go to the next stage of you removing yourself from the chaos and going inside and saying, look, I'm missing something here. I want to be able to understand that other person. And that's one of the big keys here. If you're a thinking type and you develop more sensation and more intuition, hey, that's no problem. It's going to get you some more balance there. But the real gold within yourself is to get in touch with your feeling part and understand what that's all about through experience and other things. Same with the feeling type. When they isolate, they need to recognize that, hey, I can go these 2 ways and get some benefit, but here's where the real gold is. And of course, it goes the other ways too. So this is the basic concepts. Now, with that being said, let's adjust this. There we go. Let us do a little reading here. And what we have, here we go. This will work. Here's the psychological types. Let me move this out of the way a little bit. Whoops. Anyway, I've been doing one of Andrew Kaufman's protocols. You can go to his site and get that free protocol for how to cleanse yourself of toxic material that's fat soluble. And let's see here. I'm just going to read a few passages in here. Now, some of the things that I read out of Jung's work aren't his words. They're the words of the alchemist that he's studying. And, I reviewed the first 20 minutes from what I taped yesterday, and I could go back and make things a lot better. But no, let's just leave it as is so you can see how my process works. If I was talking to a crowd, can I go back and overdo that? No. I come back and I correct it the next day or the next hour to get things a little more clear because they're giving me feedback. I'm not getting that feedback right now. Or am I? I must presume unduly upon the good will of the reader if I may hope to be rightly understood. I would be relatively simple if every... you gotta excuse me. Let me try that over again. I must presume unduly upon the goodwill of the reader if I may hope to be rightly understood. It would be relatively simple if every reader knew to which category he belonged. But it is often very difficult to find out whether a person belongs to one type or the other, especially in regards to oneself. In respect of one's own personality, one's judgment is as a rule extraordinarily clouded. This subjective clouding of judgment is particularly common because in every pronounced type, there is a special tendency to compensate the one-sidedness of that type, a tendency which is biologically purposive since it strives constantly to maintain the psychic equilibrium. The compensation gives rise to secondary characteristics or secondary types, which present a picture that is extremely difficult to interpret. So difficult that one is inclined to deny the existence of one type altogether and believe only in individual differences. Now, those secondary compensations, if I'm a thinking type, that would be the intuitive and the sensation are my secondary ones. That's what he's talking about there. And, this psychological types, when they're doing their work, Jung's doing his work, he doesn't go out there and try to find all that stuff. He doesn't bother with it. He can look at data, and then he can try to see what's going on in the situations with these different types. And the neat thing about this book is Jung goes through, what all these things. Let me just read this. This is really a key thing to understand, what depth he gets into. This is his table of context. And the problem of types in the history of classical and medieval thought. Oh, we're going to go back to the collective unconscious history. Schiller's idea of the type problem. The Apollyon and Dionysian, the type problem in human character. He gets into the introverted woman, the extroverted man, the introverted man. The type problem in poetry. Oh, so he gets into Goethe, Prometheus, and many other things, The type problem in physical pathology. The type problem in modern philosophy. The type problem in biography. General descriptions of the types. Definitions. Oh, he gives definitions of his words. Isn't that nice? So that is basically one of the ingredients that is there. If you want to know more about it, the thing to do is go ahead and read his works to get more depth in it. But recognizing that this is something that plays in here, that we have different viewpoints of where people are coming from. And this is a map. It's just a map. It's just a theory, but it's been used and it works to a certain extent. That's the key thing. And without these theories and these maps, then we can't differentiate things and we can't think about them and work with them. That's where the work is in being able to map out the territory to as close to reality as we can and correct it as we go on. Other people have other systems that work also that are completely different than this. All right. Well, last night I did some reading in Science and Sanity, and Jung has a term called synchronicity. What it means is things happen together that, it doesn't make any sense that they happen together, but they align with each other. You think of someone and suddenly they call, or you bump into them in the street. For me, it's the books a lot of the times. I'm reading one book on a subject, and then I'm reading other books at the same time. Next thing I know, 2, 3, maybe even 4 of those other books start talking about that same situation and subject within that day. And I may even hear other people bring the subject up. So last night, I started reading this, and this is what came up. It follows from the consideration that any psychological occurrence, this is Science and Sanity, has a number of aspects: an affective, an intelligent, a psychological, and a colloidal. Now, I know those are different, but affective is your feelings. Your intellectual is your thinking. Your physiological is your sensation. And your colloidal is the things that just come up and whatnot. For instance, of the psychologically resulting in a theory of sanity, the above four aspects are of most importance. As our actual lives are lived in objective, unspeakable levels and not on verbal levels, it appears as a problem of evolution. That the objective level, including, of course, our unspeakable feelings, emotions, is the most important, and that the verbal levels are only auxiliary, sometimes useful, but at present often harmful because of the disregard for the somatic reaction. The somatic reaction is when someone says something and it affects you emotionally. That's a somatic reaction. You listened to the map and it affected you emotionally. Okay, the role of the auxiliary verbal level is only fulfilled if those verbal processes are translated back into the first order effects. First order effects are things that have actually happened, not rumors about them, not speculations about them, not assumptions about them. Okay. Thus, through verbal intercourse, in the main, scientists discover useful first-order abstractions, objective, by verbal intercourse again. Culture is built, but this only when the verbal processes affect the unspeakable psychological manifestation, such as our feelings, emotions. So he's speaking about getting the balance between thinking and emotions. Okay? Now, let's go on here a little bit. It is of great importance, I'm going to skip down a little bit. It is of great importance to realize that the term somatic is non-elementistic. In other words, it's not pulling things apart. It keeps things together as a whole like they should be, like they really are. That's the way he's defining this. Okay? As it involves conjointly the emotional as well as the intellectual factors. Interesting. From the non-elementistic point of view, any effect or impulse or even human instinct, when made conscious, acquires non-elementistic meanings. That means that it's all together and becomes ultimately a psychological configuration of desirable or undesirable to the individual relations, thus revealing a workable non-element mechanism. Psychotherapy, by making the unconscious conscious and by verbalizing, attempts to discover meanings of which the patient was not aware. If the attempt is successful and the individual meanings are revealed, these are usually found to belong to an immature period of evaluation. An immature period of evaluation. Interesting. In the person's life. They are then consciously revised and rejected, and the given patient either improves or is entirely relieved. The condition for a successful treatment seems to be that the process should be managed in a non-elementistic way, as a whole, not in parts. Mere verbal formalism is not enough because the full elementistic meaning to the patient are not divulged. Consequently, in such a case, somatic reactions are not affected and the treatment is a failure. So in other words, the words need to connect to the emotions in a way that reflects reality. Which ones are wrong? Is your emotions reacting improperly, or is your verbal improper to the emotions? Getting those in lines makes a big difference. Okay, let's go on with this because this is very interesting. Now, when things happen in the group or crowd, people get set off because they heard something that means that meant something to them that may not be reality. What happens is a lot of times I'll personally be talking to people about things, and I'll say something that they interpret in such a way that it upsets them. Their eyes will go up or to the sides, they'll disassociate, and they won't want to go any further. At that point, if I push the point, I'm going to end up in conflict with this person because I hit something unconscious and it doesn't want to come into consciousness because it'll overwhelm their conscious being. And that's not good to do if you understand what's going on. So at that point, I back up, try to rephrase things and move on to other subjects and just say, hey, there's a little bit of misunderstanding there. I'm not there to fix this person. I'm not a psychoanalyst. I'm not any of those things. I'm just trying to get along and go on with things. Okay, now let's go on with some more of this. Trigger warning. All right, here we go. From a non-elementistic point of view, which makes illegitimate any elementary verbal splitting of emotions and intellect. In other words, you're doing something that splits the emotions and the intellect. These processes must be analyzed in terms of order, indicating the stages of the psychoneural process as a whole. Empirically, there is a difference between an emotion, which becomes rationalized, and emotions invoked or produced by ideas. The order is different in each instance. And if in a given nervous system at a given moment or under special conditions, the lower or higher nerve centers work defectively, the nervous reactions are not well balanced and the manifestations acquire a one-sided character, either too intellectual or too feeling. Of course, we could go to the other two ones, the sensations and intuition, but that's not where we're at right now. The other aspect is not abolished, but is simply less prominent or less effective. Thus, in morons, there's the trigger warning, imbeciles, and in many forms of infantilism, the thinking is very emotional and of a low grade. In so-called moral imbeciles, and perhaps in schizophrenics, the thinking may be seemingly normal, yet it does not affect the feelings which are deficient. There's where the splitting comes on. There's where they try to push their thoughts on each other. It's going to split more and there's going to be conflict. From the non-elementic, somatic, human point of view, any effect only gains meaning when it is conscious, or in other words, when an actual or assumed set of relations is present. In an ideal, balanced, and effective human nervous system, the emotions would be translated into ideas, and ideas translated into emotions with equal faculty. In other words, the somatic reactions of a given individual would be under full control, capable of being educated, influenced, transformed quickly and effectively, the very reverse of the present situation. The present inquiry shows that the lack of psychological method for training and lack of analysis and understanding of the factors involved are responsible for this deplorable situation. The above processes are quite obvious on racial grounds. If we study science and mathematics from the semantic point of view, with very few exceptions, we only fail individually. For instance, a Euclidean or Newtonian had hunches, intuitions, then they rationalized the verbalization, then they rationalized and verbalized them, and so affected the rest of us and established the natural feeling for for the Euclidean geometry, Newtonian mechanics. When new non-Euclidean or non-Newtonian systems were produced, many of the older sciences could understand them, could even master the new symbolic technique, yet their feelings were seldom affected. They thought in the new way, but they continued to feel in the old way. Their somatic reactions did not follow fully the transformation of their ideas, and this produced a split in personality. All right. That's a really cool book. Now, as you can see, this guy wasn't into Carl Jung, but he's coming up with very similar, and in some instances, the same language when it comes to the psychological types, the thinking and the feeling. And he's giving information that helps to improve the map. Now, when I read these books, I don't follow these people. I don't blindly just take what they have and say, hey, these guys have to memorize it all and see if I can spit it out. No. When I see patterns that help the patterns I already have in my imagination or whatever for my maps, it helps me to adjust those. I've had experiences and things, and it's like, I'm a little confused about those experiences. Suddenly I read about these experiences from different authors, and it brings things more in focus. Now, let's go back to general semantics. We have a thing where he talks about the proper order and things are reversed. What he's talking about there is that there's an actual event. People witnessed it. Now, the actual event is one thing. How they witnessed that, whatever they projected on it, however they interpret it, changes that a little bit. And they talk to somebody else, and then it gets changed a little bit. It gets turned into people's opinions, rumors, and other things. And someone else hears these rumors, on social media or whatever, take it as the real thing, and have a somatic reaction that makes them mad, and they want to go out there and do something about this. And if they knew the actual facts, they may find out that, holy mackerel, that's not what happened at all. In fact, it's just the opposite. So this is the situation that he gets into. The way he works it with general semantics is that people are saying things, thinking it's true, thinking it's real, but they're not digging down to find out what the actual facts are. Something Tom Cowan and Andrew Kaufman specialize in. What are the actual facts of these things? Let's reach down to the closest to it we can get and examine this from as many sources as we can to really see what is true about these words we hear and what is false. Then we can get the proper maps in our minds and make better predictions and decisions in the future. That's the key behind general semantics. Okay. Now, saturation. The mind can only handle so much, and this is an individual thing depending on an individual and which subject they're dealing with. If I'm fluid in a certain subject and I'm hearing stuff about it, I can absorb that very quickly because I'm familiar with it. If the subject's new to me and it's got new words and terms, and I'm trying to catch up to this kind of stuff, someone's talking about it, I can become saturated and not be able to get everything he says. This may be happening right now with you, with some of the stuff I've done in the last about half hour or so, over the last few days. I don't know. So this is something that we have to consider. When I'm reading Jung the first time, I'll be reading his book and say, oh man, this really nails something. This really means something to me. And the next thing I know, I can't remember what I just read. I said, oh, that's a flag. I go back, read it again. I'm like, oh, this something hits something that's a little sore in me. And I just kind of disassociated from it. Let me read this a few times and mark that page and work this out with myself. I did that well over a period of 10 years with Jung's work while laying out the sun for about 20 minutes, almost daily, and sometimes taking it to a dentist appointment. I use my little Kindle, paper white, makes things really simple and easy. It has a nice dictionary, nice Latin dictionary, so I can look up those words too when he uses Latin. And this is the process I go through to educate myself. With difficult books that are new to me, I read them first several times and highlight the areas that I need to study to learn what these terms, learn what these theories are all about. So when I go through them the second time, I'm not just understanding maybe 15 to 30%. I'm getting up to maybe 40, 50%. Now I'm getting up more. Now I finally get to a point where I can stick it in my Fire Kindle and have it read to me at a casual speed. As time goes by, we can speed that up and listen to it again faster. And as long as if I disassociate while it's being read to me, or I can just turn the pages back and listen to it again. So these are techniques I use to, expand my intellect so I won't be saturated so quickly. So if a situation happens out there in the world, maybe I'm accused of something I didn't do. Maybe someone has a misunderstanding. Maybe a car accident happens. I don't get overwhelmed. I can focus. My mind's used to this. I recognize that it's dangerous out there. Things can happen. And the best way for survival is to be able to stay focused. If people are going crazy, I want to be able to work with that to try to bring things into a more calm manner, no matter what's happening, so that we can work through what's going on. Participation mystique, another term of Jung. Participation mystique, it happens in a group. You're participating with these people and you're just having a great time and you're losing yourself and you're just getting into things and you're saying things and other things and you're really enjoying yourself. So that's participation mystique. We'll get more into that one a little later. Okay, now, the golden age of alchemy was the 16th and first half of the 17th century. So I'm just going to throw a few things out here, and then we'll go on with some more of Jung's work. Here's a good one. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Follow the theme that's going on here? I want to become conscious of the unconscious things I do. One of the techniques I've been doing for a long time, since I was a cook, was to teach my left hand through my right hand to do what my right hand does, so I can become more ambidextrous. The same token, I want to teach my right hand from my left hand what it does. Very simple, that's it. But very difficult to remember and actually do. And don't start with knives. You don't want to demolish your best hand. Start with things like writing and eating and things like that. Opening doors, recognizing, get things more even out those two sides. Memorized or realized? Are you just memorizing this stuff and have no feelings towards it and are just trying to come up with the next memorized thing to spit out there? Or have you actually experienced things and have an emotional somatic reaction towards them and have it so much into your being that even if you're partly unconscious, it still works. Your body and your mind know what to do. When you hear things, you have a deeper understanding because you can visualize and feel and have an intuitive feeling for it and have the sensation of it. AI can't do that. It can only memorize. I can get a tape recorder for memorizing stuff, a parrot or something. Brainstorming. I've got a situation where I got a problem. Well, let me just brainstorm of all these different things I can do. Some of them are opposite each other. Which one's going to work? Maybe a mixture. Have other people talk about it with me so we can come up with some other ideas. This is part of our design things that we used to do. It's really cool. In programming languages, we basically only have pieces of information moving around memory that emulate a higher abstraction. So there's if statements. If this, do that, else this. Or if this, else, if this, else, if this, else. Very iffy. And then there's loops. Do this so many times. Or repeat this so many times. Or do this once, and while this condition is there, continue to loop. Very loopy. And then in the programming language can send out a digital signal or retrieve one, or an analog signal or retrieve one. That's all it is. That's what AI is doing. They do it from ones and zeros. We have higher abstractions. That's the psychology of AI compared to a human.